why the SR-71's predecessor required married pilots, and it had nothing to do with maturity. The year is 1967. Somewhere over North Vietnam, CIA pilot Dennis Sullivan is flying at 2,100 miles per hour, 17 miles above the Earth, when his threat warning system lights up. 6 SA-2 missiles have just launched. Sullivan does not turn. He does not dive. At Mach 3.2, there is no point. The A-12 Oxcart is already outrunning them. All he can do is watch through his periscope as 3 of the missiles detonate close enough to see the flash. He keeps flying, straight and level. The mission continues. When Sullivan lands at Kadena Air Base in Okinawa, ground crews find a small piece of Soviet shrapnel embedded in his wing. He does not call his wife to tell her what happened. He cannot. She does not know he flies for the CIA. She does not know the A-12 exists. She believes her husband works as a civilian test pilot for Lockheed, flying routine jobs out of a base in California. This is the life every A-12 pilot lived. Not because they chose deception, but because the CIA demanded it. And the agency had one requirement, above all others, that guaranteed these men would keep their secrets, endure their risks, and never be tempted to defect. Every pilot had to be married. If you're fascinated by the hidden stories of Cold War aviation and the extreme measures taken to protect America's most classified secrets, make sure to hit that subscribe button and like this video. Your support helps us bring more of these incredible historical accounts to light. To understand why the CIA would require married pilots, you need to understand what was happening inside American intelligence in 1960. They were hemorrhaging secrets. On June 25, 1960, 2 NSA cryptologists named William Martin and Vernon Mitchell boarded a flight from Washington to Mexico City. They told their supervisors they were taking a vacation together. From Mexico City, they traveled to Cuba. From Cuba, they boarded a Soviet freighter. On September 6, 1960, Martin and Mitchell appeared at a press conference in Moscow. They requested Soviet citizenship. Then they began to talk. They revealed which Soviet codes the NSA had broken. They exposed American surveillance operations against allies and enemies alike. They described the inner workings of the most secret signals intelligence organization in the Western world. A classified NSA study would later conclude that their defection caused more damage to the agency's security program than any single event in its history. But Martin and Mitchell were just 2 names on a list that kept growing. Meanwhile, in Moscow, a young American was settling into his new life. Lee Harvey Oswald had been a Marine Corps radar operator at Atsugi Air Base in Japan, where the CIA's U-2 spy planes were stationed. In October 1959, he walked into the American embassy in Moscow and announced his intention to defect. He told the consul he intended to give the Soviets everything he knew. "I might know something of special interest," he said. That something was the U-2. Oswald would eventually return to America in 1962 with a Russian wife named Marina. But in 1960, as the CIA began planning its next generation of spy planes, he represented something terrifying. A young, single American with access to reconnaissance secrets who had simply walked away. Then came May 1st, 1960. Francis Gary Powers was cruising at 70,000 feet over Sverdlovsk, deep inside Soviet territory, when an SA-2 missile detonated near his U-2. The aircraft broke apart. Powers survived. He was captured, interrogated, and paraded before the world's cameras. President Eisenhower claimed the U-2 was a weather research plane that had drifted off course. The cover story held for 6 days. Then Premier Khrushchev revealed that Powers was alive, had confessed to espionage, and would stand trial for crimes against the Soviet state. The Paris summit collapsed. The brief thaw in Cold War relations ended overnight. I want you to understand something about the timing here. The Powers shootdown occurred in May 1960. Martin and Mitchell defected in June 1960. The CIA began selecting pilots for the A-12 program in late 1961. Every official involved in that selection process had watched these disasters unfold in real time. They had seen what happened when secrets leaked. They had seen what happened when a pilot was captured. They had seen what happened when young, single men with security clearances decided to walk away. And they were about to build something worth far more to Soviet intelligence than anything that had come before. In a secure hangar at Area 51, the aircraft taking shape looked like something from another century, not the 20th, the 21st. Clarence Kelly Johnson and his Skunk Works team at Lockheed had designed the A-12 Oxcart to do what the U-2 could not, fly so fast and so high that no Soviet weapon could touch it. The specifications were beyond anything that had ever flown. Maximum speed, Mach 3.2, over 2,100 miles per hour. Cruising altitude, 90,000 feet, 17 miles above the Earth. At those speeds, the aircraft could cross the continental United States in 70 minutes. Its cameras could photograph objects 1 foot long from the edge of space, but building such an aircraft meant solving problems that had never been solved. At Mach 3, air friction heats an aircraft's skin to over 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Around the engines, temperatures exceeded 1,000 degrees. At those temperatures, aluminum, the standard material for aircraft construction, turns soft. It loses its strength. It fails. The A-12 would need to be built from titanium, and titanium, as Lockheed engineers quickly discovered, was nightmarish to work with. The metal is brittle. It cracks under stress. It cannot be welded using conventional techniques. Engineers discovered that cadmium-plated wrenches left invisible residue on titanium surfaces that later caused catastrophic stress fractures. Chlorine in the Burbank water supply corroded parts during washing. Even the ink in marking pens ate through the metal. Kelly Johnson flew to Area 51 repeatedly during development, working 18-hour days alongside his engineers to solve problems that threatened to kill the program entirely. But here is where the story becomes almost absurd. America did not have enough titanium. The country lacked significant deposits of rutile ore, the raw material from which titanium is refined. The world's largest supplier of aerospace-grade titanium was the Soviet Union. So the CIA created an elaborate procurement operation. Shell companies were established around the world. Third-party intermediaries placed orders through neutral countries. Cover stories were invented to explain why these fake businesses needed such large quantities of exotic metal. One cover story claimed that titanium was needed for commercial pizza ovens. The Soviet Trade Ministry, happy to earn hard currency, filled the orders without question. They had no idea they were selling the Americans the raw material for a spy plane designed to photograph Soviet military installations. 92% of the A-12's structural weight was Soviet titanium. The first A-12 arrived at Area 51 in February 1962. On April the 26th, Lockheed test pilot Lou Schalk took it into the air for an unofficial first flight. By the end of 1964, the fleet had logged over 1,100 flights. This was the secret the CIA was protecting. They had purchased titanium from the Soviets, built it into spy planes at a base that did not exist, and were now preparing to fly those planes over Soviet territory to photograph Soviet secrets. If any detail leaked, the consequences would make the U-2 incident look minor. Now they needed pilots, 11 men who would keep this secret no matter what. Men who would never defect, never talk, never be tempted by anything the Soviets could offer. The CIA believed they knew what kind of man that was, a married man. In a windowless room at CIA headquarters, the personnel team assembled their criteria. The pilots would need at least 2,000 total flight hours and at least 1,000 hours in high-performance jet fighters. They would need to be between 25 and 40 years old. They would need to be under 6 feet tall and under 175 pounds to fit in the A-12's cramped cockpit, and they would need to be married. CIA historian David Robarge would later document this requirement plainly. Pilots had to be married, emotionally stable, and well-motivated. The height requirement made sense. The cockpit was tiny. The flight hour requirement made sense. This was the most demanding aircraft ever built. But marriage, here is the logic. As the CIA saw it, a single man answers to no one. If he grows disillusioned, if he encounters financial problems, if the Soviets make him an attractive offer, he can simply disappear. He leaves nothing behind. He owes nothing to anyone. A married man is anchored. He has a wife who depends on him. He likely has children. He has a home, a community, a life woven into the fabric of American society. If he defects, he does not merely betray his country. He abandons his family. His wife faces investigation, suspicion, humiliation. His children grow up fatherless, their father's name synonymous with treason. Would any man fly the most classified aircraft in history to Moscow if it meant leaving all of that behind? The CIA was betting the entire A-12 program that the answer was no. The selection process was kept so secret that candidates' commanding officers were not told what their subordinates were being evaluated for. Pilots received mysterious summons to Washington for interviews they could not discuss afterward. By November 1961, only 5 pilots had agreed to join. A second round of recruitment produced 6 more. The 11 men selected were Kenneth S. Collins, Ronald Jack Layton, Francis J. Frank Murray, Walter L. Ray, Russell J. Scott, William L. Sklyer, Dennis B. Sullivan, Melly Voivodich Jr., Alonzo J. Lawn, Walter, Jack W. Weeks, and David P. Young. All of them were married. They were sheep-dipped, CIA terminology for transferring military personnel to agency employment undercover. Officially, they resigned to their Air Force commissions and became civilian test pilots for Lockheed. Unofficially, they reported directly to the CIA. They were forbidden from telling anyone the truth about their work, including their wives. In a house in Southern California, Jane Collins is washing dishes while her 4 children do homework at the kitchen table. Her husband Ken left for work on Monday morning. He will return Friday evening. This has been the rhythm of their life for years now. Ken told her he works for Hughes Aircraft, testing experimental planes at a remote facility. He cannot say where. He cannot say what he flies. He cannot explain why he is sometimes gone for weeks at a time. Jane has learned not to ask questions. She does not know that her husband actually works for the Central Intelligence Agency. She does not know that he flies a Mach 3 reconnaissance aircraft out of a secret base in the Nevada desert called Area 51. She does not know that this base does not officially exist, that the aircraft does not officially exist, that her husband's entire professional identity is a carefully constructed lie. She knows only that she trusts him, and that trust is about to be tested in ways she cannot imagine. On May 24, 1963, Ken Collins was flying a subsonic engine test at 25,000 feet when he encountered heavy clouds. He climbed to 30,000 feet, but the weather did not clear. His chase pilot, Jack Weeks, was forced to break off. Then Collins noticed his instruments showing impossible readings. Ice had formed in the pitot tube, the sensor that measures airspeed. The air data computer, receiving corrupt information, was feeding false data to every instrument in the cockpit. Collins had no way to know his true speed or altitude. In the thick clouds, he had no visual reference. The A-12 entered a flat, inverted spin. Collins ejected, upside down, from 30,000 feet. He landed in the Utah desert near Wendover, his parachute settling around him in the sand. Within minutes, a pickup truck appeared carrying 3 civilians who had seen the parachute descending. Collins looked back toward the horizon. Somewhere behind him, scattered across the desert floor, lay the wreckage of the most classified aircraft in American history. If these civilians found it, they would see technology that was not supposed to exist. He made a decision in seconds. Collins told the civilians the aircraft was an F-105 Thunderchief carrying a nuclear weapon. He warned them the crash site might be radioactive. He urged them to drive him away immediately. They believed him. At a highway patrol station, Collins called Area 51. Within hours, a CIA recovery team was racing toward the crash site. Within 72 hours, every fragment of wreckage had been removed. The official records listed the incident as an F-105 crash. Local law enforcement was warned to stay silent. Nearby farmers were told nuclear contamination made the area dangerous, but the CIA needed to be certain Collins had not compromised the program. At Area 51, agency officials asked Collins to submit to interrogation under sodium pentothal, truth serum. They needed to verify that he had revealed nothing during his contact with the civilian. Collins agreed. The interrogation confirmed his story. He had maintained his cover even while falling out of the sky. But when the drug wore off, Collins was still impaired. He was driven home to California in this condition. Jane Collins watched her husband stumble through the front door, barely able to stand, unable to explain what had happened to him. She could not ask. He could not tell. This is what the marriage requirement actually meant. Not stability, not maturity. Silence. Secrets kept not just from enemies, but from the people these men loved most. Years later, Collins would write about. He said the person he owed the greatest gratitude was his wife, for her perseverance in the face of the unknown, support of me and our children, understanding when I could tell her nothing, and her understanding when I could tell her nothing. That was the price of being married to an A-12 pilot. Diane Ray had been married for 3 months when the men in dark suits came to her door. Her husband Walter was 33 years old, quiet, serious, dedicated. He had told her he worked as a test pilot for Lockheed, flying experimental aircraft out of a facility in Nevada. He left on Monday mornings and returned Friday evening. He could never explain exactly what he did. Diane had accepted. Military wives learned to accept such things. On January 5, 1967, Walter Ray took off from Area 51 at 11:59 a.m. on a routine training. Call sign Dutch 45, the flight plan called for 2 aerial refuelings. and a series of test maneuvers. The first refueling went smoothly, but the second tanker was running low on fuel itself and could only transfer 57,000 pounds instead of the planned 61,000. Ray was 4,000 pounds. He compensated by flying a fuel-efficient, reduced-power climb on his return. The calculations said he would make it, but a fuel gauge was malfunctioning. It showed more fuel remaining than Ray actually had. At 3:51 p.m., 70 miles from Area 51, the low fuel warning lights illuminated. Both engines flamed out moments later. Ray was 10 minutes from home, close enough to see the mountains surrounding Groom, close enough to almost make it. At 4:02 p.m., he transmitted his final message. He was preparing to eject. The ejection was successful. Ray separated cleanly from the disintegrating aircraft. The system was designed to save pilots even from the edge of space, but Walter Ray had made a modification to his ejection. He was a short man. The standard headrest did not fit him properly. Like many pilots, he had added a small wooden block to adjust it. It was a common modification. No one had tested what would happen during an actual At 16,000 feet, when the seat was supposed to release him so his parachute could deploy, the block interfered with the mechanism. Walter Ray fell 3 miles. He hit the desert floor, still strapped to feet. Search teams found his parachute the next day. It had deployed on impact, too late to him. The silk formed a shroud around his body. His ejection seat lay 50 yards away. His boots still had their spurs on. The Air Force announced that an SR-71 Blackbird from Edwards Air Force Base had crashed during a routine test. The A-12 did not officially exist. Neither did Walter Ray's true occupation. His widow Diane was told her husband had died in an aircraft accident. She was not told what aircraft. She was not told where. She was not told why. Walter Ray was the first CIA pilot killed during Project Oxcart. A star was added to the memorial wall at CIA headquarters. No name appeared in it. He had been married for 3 months. Jack Weeks died on June 4, 1968, 2.5 weeks before the A-12 program was scheduled to end. The fleet had been deployed to Kadena Air Base in Okinawa for Operation Black Shield, flying reconnaissance missions over North Vietnam and North Korea. Weeks was conducting a functional check flight after an engine replacement. The flight began normally, standard refueling, standard climb, standard test route over the Pacific. Then the telemetry system began transmitting alarm data. Right engine exhaust temperature, 1,580 degrees, well above normal. Fuel flow, dropping rate. Altitude, falling. Ground controllers at Kadena tried to establish radio contact. No results. The telemetry continued for several more minutes, painting a picture of an aircraft in catastrophic distress. Then all signals ceased. Neither the aircraft nor Jack Weeks was ever found. He had vanished into the Pacific Ocean, along with every trace of Article 120. On June 26, 1968, at Area 51, Vice Admiral Rufus Taylor presented the CIA Intelligence Star for Valor to the surviving pilots. Jack Weeks' widow accepted medal. The 5 pilots who flew Operational Black Shield missions stood together at that ceremony. Ken Collins, Jack Layton, Frank Murray, Dennis Sullivan, Mele Voyage. Between them, they had flown 29 reconnaissance missions over North Vietnam and North Korea in just 13 months. Mele Vojvodich flew the first, on May 31, 1967. Jack Layton flew the last, over North Korea, on May 8, 1968. Sullivan, who had watched 6 missiles launch at his aircraft and kept flying straight and level, received no special recognition for that mission. It was simply what the job required. The A-12 was never hit directly. It was too fast, high. Soviet and North Vietnamese air defenses had no answer for an aircraft that cruised at 3 times the speed of sound at the edge of base. Frank Murray flew the final A-12 flight on June 21, 1968, ferrying Article 131 to storage at Palmdale, a short hop flown at subsonic speeds to avoid attracting attention. He later described it as the happiest and saddest flight of his career. The marriage requirement had achieved exactly what the CIA did. Not one pilot defected, not one aircraft fell into Soviet hands, not one wife was ever told the truth about what her husband acted, where he actually went, or how close he actually came to dying. The KGB never turned an A-12 pilot. They never came close, whether that was because of the marriage requirement, or because of the caliber of men who flew, or simply because no Soviet agent ever made contact, is impossible to know. But the CIA's theory held: anchor a man to a family, and he becomes almost impossible to turn. The cost of that theory was paid by people who never signed security clauses. Jane Collins raised 4 children while her husband disappeared to a place that did not exist, flying an aircraft that did not exist, keeping secrets he could not share even when he came home, drugged and stealing. Diane Ray was widowed after 3 months of marriage and was never told how her husband actually died. The wives of the A-12 pilots never received medals. They never received recognition. They were never told until decades later what their husbands had actually accomplished. They were simply expected to. They did. 10 of the 15 A-12s survive today, scattered across museums throughout America. One rests at CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia. One sits on the deck of the USS Intrepid in New York. Article 131, the last to fly, ended up in a museum in Birmingham, Alabama. The program remained classified for decades. The pilots could not speak about what they had done until the 90s. By then, some of the wives had died without ever knowing. Ken Collins is still alive as of this recording. He still writes about Jane, about her patience and her faith and her willingness to accept what she could not understanding when I could tell her. That phrase contains the entire history of the A-12 program, the engineering triumph, the operational success, the human cost. No piloted aircraft has ever flown faster or higher than the A-12 Oxcart, and no pilots have ever been selected by stranger criteria. They had to be qualified, they had to be short, they had to be light, and they had to be married. Not because married men are more mature, not because married men are more stable, because married men have something to lose, and the CIA was betting everything that these 11 men would never be willing to lose it.